All right. Welcome to anybody watching. I'm just getting the live stream started. Hey, Eddie. Eddie has entered the chat. He's just hanging out. But yeah, it's about 10 minutes until the class time starts. So this is just the preview of the actual lecture that we're going to start on in 10 minutes. I always start them a little early just for the benefit of those that arrive a few minutes before the official class time. So anyway, hanging out with Eddie for a few minutes. No audio. Okay. 1 second. You can't hear me right now? No? No audio at all? It's good now? You can hear me? Everything okay? Let me know if there was an issue with the audio. Are we good? I saw that you typed good, but I don't know if you did that just before I asked. So let me know one more time if the audio is working there on your side. Okay, cool. Thank you. Awesome. I don't know if the previous comments that I just made were audible to those watching this video at any given time, but I was just saying we have about 9 minutes till class time, and I'm just getting the stream started before the 4 o'clock hour arrives. Yeah. Good to be with you. Waiting for our other classmates to arrive, so it'll just be, a couple minutes, obviously. No rush. Just got my sparkling water. Gotta stay hydrated. Good afternoon. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome back. Hey, Carson. Welcome back. Good to see you too. Still 7 minutes till 4. Hey, Justin. Good to see you. Welcome back too. Thanks, guys, for being here a couple minutes early. I guess to anybody watching this not live, in the future, you'll probably skip to about the 10-minute mark of the video to get to the beginning of the lecture content. But anyway, here we are live, so good to see you guys. Hi, Noah. Welcome back. A little over 5 minutes. Yeah, Thanks, Jennifer. 2 kitties that I own, you know, Eddie and Peachy. So we'll see if they come back. They're a little shy sometimes for the camera. I think they seem to understand that, you know, I'm taping or something like that. But anyway. Eddie, Peachy, you guys want to hang out? No? Hi, Jasmine. Welcome back. For sure. Thank you. Okay. Okay, I'm looking at the clock. 4 minutes. We'll get started on time. Hi, Nick. Welcome back. Hello. Okay, 3 minutes. Welcome, everybody. Just hang in there. A few more moments, and we'll be starting at 4. Hello, Dan, Natalia, everybody here. Great to be with you guys. Hey, Elena, good to see you too. Just got 2 minutes to go here as we just wait for the top of the hour. Hey, Mary Jane. Leanne, welcome. Hey, Julian. Okay, just a minute. I'll get things ready. Hi, Andrea. Anthony, good to see you there. Violet, welcome. All right, guys. Well, it's now basically 4 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our lecture. So thanks, everyone, for being here. First off, I hope you had a good weekend and that your second week of classes is going pretty well. Today, we just continue through our lecture series. Anybody that's here attending, please, say hi, and then I'll have a record that you were present. So to everybody, including Karen, good to see you guys, like I say. All right, so as we know, we're studying contemporary moral issues, and a big part of that, welcome to everybody arriving and just opening some comments on our topic. We're learning about ethics, and one of the main things that we have to study to begin our analysis of the concept of ethics is ethical theory. So let me just review some of the major concepts that were discussed last time. I usually start each new meeting with a brief summary of the previous lecture topic so that we have some continuity, and then we'll move on from there into some new things today. I still have a little bit of information to talk about when it comes to utilitarian ethical theory, so I'll add a few more remarks to those notes. So follow along and see if you can remember all these points. We started our class by just talking about the basic concept of ethics itself. Ethics, as you may remember, is the study of morality and moral concepts. So when people think deeply about the question of, whether an action or such is right or wrong, moral or immoral, good or bad morally, just or unjust, when we engage in these kinds of thoughts or discussions, we're thinking about morality, and those are all a set of moral concepts. We talked about how there's 3 major categories of actions within ethics. Maybe somebody can remember or remind us of what those might be. Some actions they call or label morally what? Let me see if anybody can put that in the chat. Morally such and such, as opposed to the other two. I know there's a little sometimes lag getting the chat to respond. Okay, good. Morally impermissible. Very good, Mary Jane, Jasmine. Morally impermissible acts, morally obligatory acts, and then the regular, I guess, morally permissible acts. Yes. Very good. So just in brief summary, the morally impermissible acts are thought of as actions that are wrong and they're not okay to do. And there's a whole range of things that we talked about as examples, whether it's murder, theft, lying, cheating, stealing, rape, torture, genocide, and a whole bunch of other bad things. So there's morally impermissible actions, obviously. Then there are morally permissible actions, which we put out as actions that are not wrong and they are okay to do. That could be sending money to a charity in the third world to build a children's hospital. It could also just be riding your bike down the street or flying a kite at the park. It's just things that aren't wrong, whether they create a lot of benefit or whether they're just harmless, And then there's a third category of actions, the morally obligatory ones. And these are the ones they say are morally required instead of just morally allowed. So those would be things that it would be a moral obligation to do, and it would be wrong not to do them. Maybe taking care of one's children, keeping promises, paying for services that you've already been provided for based on the implicit transaction of services and goods. So anyway, we also said that there's some distinction to be made between the basic concept of what's legal and what's moral, or what's illegal and what's immoral. Because obviously sometimes there can be unjust legal regimes themselves. And in such cases, people rise up and engage in civil disobedience against the legal standards that exist. So if it was Nazi Germany and it was a crime to give safe harbor to Jewish people, people may have broken those laws. But most people thinking theoretically about ethics would not regard those as immoral actions, even if under the standard of law that existed, they may have been considered, illegal or criminal. If there was no distinction between law and morality, then we would never be able to make criticisms of law on any kind of basis. So anyway, just a summary of those points. Then we started talking about how there are different theories that attempt to provide structure and detail as to what makes an action either right or wrong, or at least permitted. So one major moral theory is the theory of utilitarianism, which was formulated by John Stuart Mill, a great British philosopher that lived in the 1800s from 1806 to 1873. Now, there's a lot of things to say about utilitarianism, but I tried to give us the big basics. Maybe somebody can give me a quick statement in the chat about what it is that utilitarians believe. Like, what is the primary moral requirement? They say that we should always act in what kind of way? Always take the actions that result in, you'll say, the rest. We are always obligated to do whatever. Yes, act always to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. Exactly. So it's all about the maximization of total happiness. If you're looking at a set of alternative options as to what your action could be, they simply advise you to consider the total amount of aggregate happiness that would be the outcome of each one. And then your obligation would be to act in whichever way that would generate the most overall. We added some further clarity to that by expanding on the basic ideas. So we talked about how, according to the utilitarians and Mill, our author on the topic, there's this concept of the greatest happiness principle. The greatest happiness principle says that actions are morally right to whatever extent they promote happiness, and actions are morally wrong to whatever extent that they promote the reverse of happiness. And happiness, by the way, they define as basically pleasure and the absence of pain. So the reverse of that is pain and the absence of pleasure. So in other words, when you're doing something, if the action produces happiness, meaning that it causes pleasure for people or takes pain away from people, then the more pleasure caused or pain taken away in total will determine how morally good or righteous this act was. On the other hand, if you perform an action which causes pain or deprives people of pleasure, then that's bad, and the more pain that it causes or pleasure that it takes away, then the worse and worse it becomes. We then used the theory to basically explore at least one trivial choice situation to see how the theory would apply to it. And if you remember, it was this example of like people choosing pizza topping selections, given that there's a group of people with different preferences. We created a little diagram where we tried to kind of game out all the different preferences of 4 members of our class when it came to 4 possible pizza topping varieties. And then we used simple addition to determine which of the 4 would create the most happiness, in other words, the most pleasure in total for all the members of that group. Now, yes, you say, Anthony, that results in the most people being happy. Not necessarily the most people, but the most total happiness or pleasure considered as a quantity. It's the maximization of happiness that is the standard rather than the total number of people that are baseline happy. So I'll say more about that in a moment, but we'll come back to that. A couple of other things, though, I need to make clear on the utilitarian theory before we can move on to the major theoretical rival to that. How do you measure happiness, Jerome? It's not something that's easy to measure. They basically say that you just have to use common sense and your own experience in life to make a judgment as to what things cause more people happiness or less. Certainly, it's not something that we can apply a fine numerical, precise measure for, as they do in the theoretical discussions of it. But in real life, we would do something a little more informal, where we just kind of assess, to whatever extent possible, how much pleasure people would receive from the various actions that we could do. Let me tell you one more basic point about the utilitarian theory, and then we also have to speak about the objections to this theory so that we can move on to the next thing. So let me put in the chat here an important concept related to utilitarianism. This is something that Mill says. So Mill says, John Stuart Mill, that the only thing that we pursue as an end and not as a means is happiness. And since happiness and pleasure are kind of like equivalent to them, I'm just going to put / pleasure. Okay, so consider this statement that I've just typed out here. It says, according to Mill and other utilitarians, the only thing that we seek out, that we are pursuing as an end and not as a means, is happiness or pleasure. This is supposed to be another reason that is offered as to why the theory is plausible, why the theory is something that seems at least somewhat reasonable or likely to be true. But for us to understand the meaning of that statement, we have to unpack some of the words that are contained in it. The 2 that I'm thinking of primarily are the words means and end, okay? End and means. So let's go ahead and ask, what do you think those words mean? Let me refer you to a certain statement that I think a lot of us have heard in life before. Some of you maybe have ever heard the phrase that at least sometimes the ends justify the means. Does anybody think they have an idea of what that phrase means? In other words, can you explain it to us? When someone says the ends justify the means, like what are they saying? What is that exactly meaning? This will help us to understand those related words that I mentioned just now, ends and means, and then we'll understand Mill's claim here. But what does it mean? If anybody said that the ends, at least in some cases, can justify the means, what does that mean to anybody here? If you've heard the phrase or if you have any kind of basic understanding of it. Okay, so Mary Jane, you say the result makes up for the process. I like the way that you put it. Yeah, so you're putting it as if there's a result that's important enough, then it can justify whatever things that you did, the process, in other words, that was used to get to that result. So in your way of putting it then, Mary Jane, what would be the end? An end is just a what? Just kind of to, amplify and expand on your, offering here, your statement. The end would be the, as you put it, what part of that statement? Well, yeah, we're going to get to Mill's idea that the only end that any of us have is happiness. But, your original answer to my statement or question, what does it mean when the ends justify the means? You said the result can make up for the process. So the end, I was trying to gesture towards the end in your way of putting it, is like the result. But it's not just any result, it's the desired result, it's the intended outcome. So we can kind of put that as the end is like the goal or the objective. So let me put that in the chat then. Ends are just goals or objectives. Those are synonyms, so it's not like two different things, just two different words for the same concept. So if I have a goal and it's important enough, or if it's vital enough, then we would say that the means that you take to that end becomes somehow justifiable. What would be means then, according to either you, Mary Jane, or anybody else following me? If the end is your goal, the means, when people say the ends justify the means, what would you say the means are, in other words? The means are just what in relation to the goal? The methods that are used. Okay, very good, Marina, exactly. So means are just the actions that one takes or the methods that they use to achieve whatever their goals or ends are. Okay, so I'm going to put that in the chat right now. So ends are goals. Means are the things that you do to attain those goals, whatever they may be. So like say, for example, that, I had a friend that was suffering from like diabetic shock because they have a problem with diabetes, and right now their insulin or blood sugar levels are low, whatever. So they're at risk of fainting, maybe getting into a worse medical issue. It's like they urgently need some kind of sugar or something to temporarily elevate their blood sugar levels. Now, suppose at that moment in time, I'm like parked at a gas station. I don't have any of my cards or payment on me, but I quickly rush into the station. I steal a can of Coke. I give it to my friend, and now they drink it and they're able to survive that moment. Now, in this case, what's the goal? The goal is to prevent my friend's death, let's say, to save their life. Now, what was the means taken to avoid their death in this example? It's obviously the action of stealing. But in this case, you might argue that, the ends justify the means. Normally, stealing is something that we frown on or think is not okay. But in this scenario that I'm providing, it seems, at least to many, that it would be something where, the value of saving a human life is so important that it validates or justifies whatever actions that you might have had to take in order to arrive at that outcome. Now that we have a good understanding of means and ends, I want us to return back to this phrase that I wrote in the chat just above, where it says, according to Mill, the only thing that any of us are seeking out is the end of happiness, and nothing else is an end. The only thing that's the end is that, and according to him, anything else that we want, if we want it, is only desired not for its own sake, but as a method by which we can attain the real thing that we want, which is happiness or pleasure. So if pleasure or happiness is the only objective of everybody's actions, then Mill thinks, doesn't it seem reasonable to make that the sort of standard to judge morality by? Shouldn't that be like the sort of North Star principle that we guide our moral decisions and actions by? Because pleasure and happiness is what everyone's pursuing or seeking, and it's the only thing that anyone is pursuing. So we should try to maximize as much of it as possible, not just for one person, but for all. So let me try and make that sort of like relatable to you by walking you through your own current situation and seeing how maybe at the end of all of your desires and goals, happiness is the sort of main objective. So right now, one thing I know you're doing is watching this lecture, right? And you must have some reason to do it. Like this viewing of the lecture that you're experiencing right now, it's a means to some kind of goal. Like you wouldn't do it for no reason. So what objective or goal is in mind? For you to watch this lecture, it's just a means to what end? Like you do this viewing to get to what desired goal? What would you say? Like, why are you watching this? For what reason? For what, purpose? You say to learn, Mary Jane. Okay, good. And Jerome, you add to get a good grade in the class. I think that's probably fair. You'd watch a lecture, attend a lecture, whatever, in order to get good notes and learn the information clearly so that you can perform well in the class and do well in the class. So let's start with that. You attend a class. Why? As a means towards a successful outcome in terms of your grade, like passing or getting an A. So you attend as a means to the end of getting an A. But why do you want the A? I know you want to get an A, but that itself is a means to another goal. Like, why do you want to pass this class or get a good grade in the class? For what reason? To graduate or for a degree. Okay, good. So we're going to take it step by step. You attend the class as a means to what? To passing it. You want to pass the class as a partial means towards your ultimate graduation goal. But why do you want to graduate? I know that's a goal you may have. Of course, if you're a student, that's the main thing. But why do you want to graduate? That's a means to something else. The graduation is a means to what other goal? Like, why do you want to graduate? Or why do you want a degree? Simple enough, but you can say to get the career. Okay, good, Jerome. That's basically it. So I'll take us back to the beginning. You attend a class as a means to passing it. You pass it as a means to graduating. You graduate as a means to the objective of getting some kind of job or career. Okay, right. But why do you want the job or career? You just like labor? You just like, put me to work. I know you want the job, but really not for its own sake. You want the job rather as a means to what other objective? Let's ask you that question. Like, why do you want to work? You want to just be put out there and put into work. I know you want the job, but you're wanting this job for a certain reason to get money. Okay, good. So back to the start. You'll attend a class to pass it. You'll pass it to graduate. You'll graduate to get a job, and you'll get a job in order to have money. Now, why do you want the money, though? Like, I know you want money, but what's the reason to have the money? Jerome, you say it to buy the things that you want. Good. Let me put it to you this way, because literally money is a means. It's a means towards purchasing power for goods and services and financial security. So it's not like desired for its own sake. It's desired for the attainment of those other things, the purchasing power for goods and services and financial security. Now, some of you are saying to survive, and I just have to say no, actually. I mean, you would survive with no job at all in prison if necessary. We do have systems that are going to keep people alive, whether you don't make money and you're just living off of welfare or whether you're in prison or something else. So you want it really to live, not just to survive, because you're going to survive regardless. You want it in order to have a happy, pleasurable life. I'm sorry, someone at my door. So frustrating. Let me just make this person leave, or maybe they won't ring the doorbell again. I get solicitors sometimes trying to sell me stuff. So I'm sure you heard the doorbell. I think they're going to leave, though. They don't know that I'm here. My car's in the garage, so it's like, whatever. But let me continue with my comment, okay, because you're all getting it good. You attend the class to pass. You pass to graduate. You graduate to get a job. You get a job to get money. You get money to have purchasing power for goods and services. But then the last question could be, why do you want purchasing power for goods and services? And that's simply because you think that it'd make you what? Like, all these things that you're doing are simply because you're pursuing what? In the end, happiness. Yes, happiness and pleasure. I guarantee you that if you thought that something you were doing would not lead you towards happiness, then you'd stop doing it because you'd have no motive to do it. If I could convince you that school is just going to actually burden you with debt and you'll never have any workable skills and you'll be paying the debt off forever and you'll be way less happy than if you never went to school, I'm sure that you would just stop going because you're only doing this since you believe that it will make you happy. Now, of course, I do think it will make you happy. That's just a sort of hypothetical. Obviously, I'm a big believer in education as a professor myself. But you understand everything that you do, from the smallest to the biggest, it's all at the end of the day towards the outcome and desire of getting happiness. And then if I ask you, well, why do you want happiness or pleasure? That's when it's okay to kind of just shrug your shoulders and be like, just because that's just fundamentally basic, So that's why Mill thinks that the maximization of total happiness or pleasure is the right kind of moral theory, because he says if you just look into your own experience, you'll recognize that everything you do is actually done in pursuit of personal happiness. So if each person seeks happiness, and that's what their main objective and goal is, he thinks that we kind of implicitly recognize it as the good worth seeking in life. So we should try to create as much total happiness as possible. Anthony, I saw your comment, but you did delete it, I think. So I don't really know what you had said. I was just about to read it. You can maybe write it again, or we can just keep moving on. But if I see something definitely in the chat, I'm always going to comment. Oh, you might not have meant to delete it. Well, it'll come back if you want to type it again, but otherwise, no worries. So yeah, making sense to you guys? That's the basic concept of why utilitarianism is all premised around, maximization of happiness. There are some objections, though, to the theory, and we have to make these objections clear, because every time we study anything in this kind of philosophy class, we're going to get balance. We're going to hear the perspective of an author or what their theory or idea is, but we're also going to hear the pushback, the criticism, the counter arguments. So I think now you have a decent working understanding of utilitarian ethical theory. Again, that you should always take whatever action will lead to the greatest overall amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. And the reason that that's supposed to be reasonable is because actions intuitively are better when more pleasure is created and worse when more pain is caused. And he furthermore adds the point that happiness is the only end that all human actions are done for the sake of. Yeah, well, you say, Anthony, college wouldn't bring me happiness, but the opportunities it would bring could bring happiness and satisfaction. Sure. I mean, hopefully so. Otherwise, why would you be doing it, right? I think you can kind of relate to that. But I also don't want us to be too jaded about the enjoyment of studying things themselves. I mean, I know that having to learn things is difficult and sometimes it may not be fun, but there's also a kind of intellectual pleasure, I would argue, that comes from the study and contemplation of the topics that we learn in college. Anyways, though, just a side thought. To the criticisms, okay, to the objections, what do people find faulty with utilitarianism? So here, let me write down one of them in our chat, okay? Okay, so one objection to utilitarianism is this phrase that I've written here in our chat, which says that according to some people anyway, it's a quote unquote theory fit for swine. It's a theory that would be better applied to swine than human beings. Anybody know what is a swine, like in a literal sense? It's a type of animal. It's which one? That one, I hope, is not too bad or hard. Yeah, it's a pig. So it's just another term or phrase for a pig, like a hog that you'd see on a farm. It doesn't have to be a boar, perhaps, Anthony, but those are, I guess, in the genetic category of pigs generally. But yeah, so pigs, basically. Now, what is it about this theory that you think might have made some people have that reaction, that according to what the theory says, their takeaway is, it sounds like it would be better suited to the lifestyle of pigs than human beings? Why? Is there anything about it that, like, you think could generate that response from people? Yeah, why? Why would anybody call this a theory for swine? What aspect of the theory might elicit this response or reaction, if any? Any ideas are fine, any suggestions are fair. I'll tell you for sure what is really meant. Marina, you say too simple, focusing only on a personal feeling such as happiness. Yes, that's actually pretty much, you got it on the nose. To some people hearing about this theory, the idea that what we should focus our entire existence on is maximizing as much pleasure and happiness as possible, some people think that that is a anti-intellectual, unworthy goal for something as intelligent and sophisticated as a human. Arguably, you could say that the life of a pig is better suited to utilitarianism because that's all they can do is roll around in the mud, eat, sleep, reproduce. But aren't we humans, and shouldn't our focus in life be on something more worthy and more elevated than just the basic pursuit of pleasure? So to these critics that make this objection, they think that the standard of maximizing pleasure is something that's better suited to the animalistic and base lifestyles of pigs as opposed to humans. So that's one objection, but Mill, the author that kind of writes about utilitarianism, he has a response to that. He has a objection, well, it's not an objection to the objection, but we can call it a reply. So he tries to respond to his critic. And how he does that is by distinguishing between two different types of pleasures. Okay, so to Mill, there's actually two different types of pleasures. So there's higher pleasures, he says. And the definition of that is things that can only be enjoyed by human beings. That's one type, but the other type are the lower pleasures. And those are things that can be enjoyed by non-human animals. Sorry, just take a second to type this. Okay. So Mill hears from the critic that this sounds to them like a theory that's fit for swine because it's all fundamentally based around making as much pleasure happen as possible. And to the critic, when they hear pleasure, their mind is filled with the sort of animalistic, basic pleasures of animals. But to Mill, this is not actually a proper way to think about the concept of pleasure because there's more than just those lower pleasures. There's higher pleasures too. So just briefly, I'm going to create a little diagram here on our board. It's going to list a few examples of both. On this side, we have higher pleasures, and they're going to fill this column. On this side, we're going to have lower pleasures, and of course, they're going to fill this other column. So let's start off with higher pleasures. My question to anyone watching this right now live is, what is something that can be enjoyed, but only by humans? And you have to think of something that basically animals are just not smart enough to possibly even comprehend. So these are things that are exclusive to, the intelligent life forms that we are. A pleasure or a thing enjoyable, but animals could never even appreciate it or get into it at all. Yeah, okay, one thing, sports, social media, movies. Okay, we're already getting a good list. So I'll put some of those things here. Sport. You say social media, I would say like the use of any technology and just the internet broadly. Yeah, that's good. I saw your additional comment there. There was art, reading, movies. Yeah, so film, art. When you say reading, that's just like language in general, the ability to speak and write and to read. Driving a car, sure, the manipulation of technology of all varieties and all sorts. You talk about substances, Natalia. It's an interesting possibility to think that like the use of mind-altering or whatever substances are something unique to humans because it takes a more advanced life form to understand what's happening when they take them or to even master the production and distribution of such things. So yeah, great list already. I'm trying to think, is there more, dance, film, the contemplation of history, science, philosophy, what we're doing right now, any academic subject matter whatsoever would be something that's not available to the animals. There's no animal in the world today that understands like the French Revolution or, the history of the American Revolution or the concept that we're the third planet from the sun, that can even talk or read a poem or, watch a film and understand the plot or appreciate playing a video game or like logging on to the internet and doing something fun. So there's a lot of pleasures he's saying that are exclusive to mankind. And that's the higher pleasures. Now, there are also lower pleasures. Question about those. What could be a thing that can be enjoyed, but it doesn't take a human to enjoy this? Your, favorite animal out there, cat, dog, or others could enjoy these type of things. They don't require a human brain. So what kind of things are those perhaps? And anybody can add to the chat. Okay, eating, sure, that's one. Eating, sleeping, drinking, taking in water and food, I think kind of on par. So those are already some of the fundamental ones. Eating, sleeping. Of course, there's the reproduction, there's like the biologically imprinted reward mechanism for successful mating. So I think that would be one. Perhaps certain like fundamental forms of activity. I mean, like rolling around and engaging in play. Some mammals at least will do this. But it's not the structured rule-based system that we have when we engage in sports. So that's obviously a distinction there. Maybe a few other things could make the list, but it's pretty much a short list. Now, coming back to the criticism against Mill, the critic was saying to Mill, isn't your theory better suited to animals like pigs because it's all about pleasure? And that means that we should basically live lifestyles that are closer to those of animals than real humans. So this is not a theory that's appropriate for humans. But Mill says, no, that's not correct. Even though it is a theory that says maximize pleasure, let me see if you can finish my thought here. According to Mill, the theory is not only about which type of pleasures. It's not exclusively pertaining to the which ones. So even though it says maximize as much happiness / pleasure as possible, it's not only talking about the I'm sure you'll get it. Which one? Yes, exactly. It's not only all about those lower pleasures. So it's not like Mill says, at all occasions, try to eat, sleep, reproduce, and engage in like fundamental physical activities as much as possible. In that case, maybe it would be seen as a theory that was better fit for pigs. But Mill says that when the theory of utilitarianism is being discussed, it's talking about both types of pleasures. And he even goes farther than that. He says that not only can humans experience both higher and lower pleasures, but I'll put a little star here to make a point about this. He says the higher pleasures are actually ranked higher. They're of greater value, and they hold more importance and worth. So he says this is not actually a theory for swine. Yes, it's a theory about pleasure, but keep in mind that when it's humans like us, we can attain and access not just the lower pleasures, but also the higher ones, which furthermore are better and loftier and more important. So he doesn't concede the point that this is a theory that's all, more appropriate to pigs or swine or other animals. He says that's a misunderstanding by his critic. The critic hears pleasure and they automatically think of only those lower pleasures. But of course, there's higher pleasures as well. And that's why he thinks that that's just a misunderstanding of his theory. Does that make sense to you guys? So like the point, counterpoint, and then the response. Mill says, okay, Santino, you're asking, but wouldn't artificial happiness made by drugs, say morphine, be the ultimate form of utilitarianism? Since the goal is higher happiness, drugs would do that. Well, I don't know. I mean, if the habitual use of drugs stood in the way of your ability to enjoy or gain some of those other higher pleasures, I think Mill would say that it's not actually making you better off and it's not really making you happier. So, I mean, you make a reasonable point, which is that this is all based on the maximization of pleasure. So why not just, take drugs all day or something like that, or just, get a massage all the time and never do anything else more intellectually important. But again, if it's Mill that was hearing your question, Santino, he would push back by saying, I insist that these higher pleasures matter more. And the mere use of drugs doesn't really qualify as a higher pleasure per se. I mean, that's why earlier when it was offered in the student comment, I said it's kind of a gray area, because even though we're the only things maybe that can reliably ingest certain substances to alter our consciousness, it's more of a sensual pleasure rather than something that's got intellectual sort of substance to it. So I think that his move there would be to say, yeah, I mean, using drugs can be pleasurable, but if it curtailed or interfered with your ability to experience or pursue the higher pleasures, then it wouldn't necessarily make your life better. Marina, couldn't they make a point that this is still too simplistic because this still seems not objective enough? Isn't it a personal choice what's higher and lower pleasures? Is reading better than sleeping? Okay, Marina, so on your point, Mill definitely has something to say. He says that the reason that you can tell these higher pleasures are higher is because no sane person, according to him, would trade their capacity for the higher pleasures for an even greater total amount of lower pleasures. This is actually the basis of a famous quote from Mill, which is that it is better to be an unsatisfied human being than a satisfied pig. Or another way he puts it, it is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a satisfied fool. Because, so you look at your animals sometimes if you have pets and you're like, wow, look at that lifestyle. It's great. They just eat, sleep, get petted, they're fed, and they're totally taken care of. And they don't have to deal with all the complexities of human life, pursuing your career, finding a partner, making your way through life, learning things, being trained in all types of subjects. Wouldn't that be a more enjoyable or happier life? But Mill says to you that actually, when you say that that's a better life, it's really only you're talking facetiously. You don't mean it in all sincerity. You're not actually being real with yourself, because think what it would mean for you to trade your condition for that of the cat, dog, or pig. You might be able to just sit around eating, sleeping, and so forth and be more easily satisfied, but you'd never again be able to talk, to read, to use the internet, to watch a movie and understand the plot. So he thinks that even though the higher pleasures, as compared to the lower pleasures, they may be more difficult to fully find satisfaction in, they are of such greater quality that no person would trade the condition of humanity for the lower condition of a non-human animal. And let me just kind of read his own words if you want to hear it from him. Don't take it from me. This is Mill speaking. So on our book, page 82 on the right side, he first presents his opponent's view. He says, now, if such a theory of life excites in many minds dislike, to suppose that life has no higher goal than pleasure, no better and more noble object of pursuit, they designate as utterly a doctrine worthy only of swine, to whom, etc., certain philosophers and modern holders of the doctrine are occasionally made the subject of equally polite comparisons. Okay, now going on to give you his response, he says, if this assumption were true, the charge could not be responded to. If the sources of pleasure were precisely the same to human beings and to swine, the rule of life which is good for one would be good enough for the other. But he says, human beings have abilities more elevated than animals, and when once made conscious of them, do not regard anything as happiness which does not include their gratification. So he then says, on all these points, utilitarians have fully proved their case. It is quite compatible with the principle of utility to recognize the fact that some kinds of pleasure are more desirable and more valuable than others. It would be absurd that quality is considered as well as quantity. The estimation of pleasure should be supposed to depend on quantity alone. So he says, if I am asked what I mean by difference of quality in pleasures, or what makes one pleasure more valuable than another, merely as a pleasure, except its being greater in amount, there is only one possible answer. Of two pleasures, if there be one to which all or almost all who have experience of both give a decided preference, irrespective of any feeling of obligation to prefer it, that is the more desirable pleasure. If one of the two is, by those who are competently acquainted with both, placed so far above the other that they prefer it, even knowing it would be attended with a greater amount of discontent, and would not resign it for any quantity of the other pleasure which their nature is capable of, we are justified in ascribing to the preferred enjoyment the superiority in quality, so far outweighing quantity as to render it, in comparison, of small account. So, reading a little more, it is an unquestionable fact that those who are equally acquainted with and equally capable of appreciating and enjoying both do give a more marked preference to the manner of existence which employs the higher faculties. Few human creatures would consent to be changed into any lower animal, even if they were promised the fullest allowance of a beast's pleasures. No intelligent human would consent to be a fool. No instructed person would be an ignoramus. So that's his basic response. I mean, it's fair for us to disagree with that if we don't find it plausible, but he at least has some kind of argument ready at hand for the objection. So that's his, quotation where he kind of expresses that thought. Now, he does say this. He says, there are going to sometimes be people that will say to the contrary. I don't agree with Mill. I think the lower pleasures are all that really matter, and I could leave these behind as long as I'm getting all these things at the maximum extent. That's actually the better life. But he says to such people, the only reason they're saying that must be because they haven't really experienced the higher pleasures in a significant enough degree. So he says if you're not experienced in the higher pleasures, then you may render a uninformed opinion that the lower pleasures matter more. But he says anybody who's going to offer a view as to which of two things is better has to have experienced both of them. And so he says to those that completely avoid or ignore the capacity for higher pleasures and only focus on the lower, they may offer their opinion that the lower pleasures have greater value, but their opinion really has no validity because they haven't even experienced the higher pleasures, or at least haven't experienced them enough. Let me give you an analogy. Say that there's a person who says, you could live on the East Coast or you could live on the West Coast, but honestly, the East Coast is way better. That's their opinion and they're entitled to it, but it really is only valid if they've what? If you follow my example. The example was, there's two coasts, they say the East one's better. But how can that be a valid opinion unless what? Unless they've lived in both, right? If they've only ever been on the East Coast and they've never set foot over here on the West, then their opinion really isn't a legitimate comparison because they don't have the experience of both that they can reasonably contrast and compare them with. So this is kind of his way of thinking about the issue of some individuals that will say the lower pleasures have greater value. In his opinion, anyway, that's only being said because they really haven't tapped into the higher pleasures enough or cared about them enough. But he says people who have, in fact, enjoyed and experienced both will give true testimony as to the superior quality of the higher pleasures. Could striving for happiness lead to unhappiness, never being satisfied? I mean, that's an interesting question, but I would say happiness is still enjoyed for the time that you have it, even if it's temporary or passing. So we're kind of built in such a way that we kind of can't ignore our desire or imperative to pursue happiness. So I don't know, is it a tragic fact about existence that we always want more happiness and we're never fully content with the amount that we have? Perhaps, but it would still not necessarily contradict his overall framework, which is that happiness is being pursued by people and it's their ultimate objective. So let's just try to create as much happiness as we possibly can. Now, anyway, that's just one objection to Mill's utilitarianism, the theory for swine thing. But honestly, I think that he offers a pretty reasonable reply by giving this distinction between the higher and lower pleasures and trying to like distance himself from any idea that he's a person promoting only the power and value of the lower pleasures. But there are some other objections that I just want to briefly touch on that are a little, I think, more important and that they, I think, cause a little bit more significant, legitimate concern as to whether this is the best moral theory. So, let's try and learn about another objection. Here's another one. I'll put it in the chat. So what, by the way, what does the word objection mean? Objection is just like a stated basis for disagreeing with some argument that has been presented. So, we've heard about utilitarian theory. We heard one objection, the theory for swine thing, and that's how he responded. Here's another one. Objection to utilitarianism number 2. That it's too demanding. Some may say that if we were really going to be expected to live up to the requirements of this theory, that it would be just too much of a burden, too demanding for us to realistically do that. So that's a question then I can follow up with you about. What is it about this theory that you think could potentially be considered a burden on people or a demand that would be hard to live up to? I'll kind of give you hints as you're trying to formulate your thoughts in the chat, but it would be because, the theory says that we should do whatever creates the most overall happiness to the greatest number, right? But is that always going to be the same thing that makes you the most happy? Not necessarily. So sometimes, according to this theory of morality, to do the quote-unquote right thing, to do whatever creates the most utility, you might have to like sacrifice your own personal happiness because the action that most favors you is not the one that creates the most total happiness for all affected. Remember last time in the pizza example, this is good, Mary Jane, I'm glad you brought that up. I was just going to touch on that. So in the pizza example, there are some people, like in our previous lecture, that might not have been fans of the type of pizza that was the one that created the most total happiness for the whole group. And those people in that scenario would be called on to like take one for the team, as it were, by conceding on that type of pizza, even though they don't prefer it as much, it's the thing that's going to make the group happier in total. Now you might think that, okay, but that's not a major sacrifice. If I sometimes have to like compromise or concede on like what I would rather eat or what movie I should watch or what show to watch, because there's something else that's going to make the whole group that I'm a part of more happy. You might say, well, those are occasional little baby sacrifices, but they're not that important, and that doesn't really disqualify the theory. But here's the problem, though. Where does it end? Is there no limitation on how much total utility or happiness that I'm supposed to create for people, even at my own expense? That's where it could start to seem problematic. So, like, let me give you a quick example. Suppose that we're dealing with one of these, like, wildfire situations, and there's 2 different homes that are each burning with people trapped inside. Okay, and let's suppose that you're on the scene, and for whatever reason, I'm just making this up, but let's just suppose you are on the scene and you see the 2 burning buildings, and you have enough time to go and open a corridor so that the people inside of one of them can exit and get out safely. But if you don't go to that whatever building, then the people inside are going to be trapped in there and they're going to die from the fire and the smoke and all the rest. Terrible thing. Now, in my hypothetical, it's like what we call a forced choice scenario. So it's like you have a forced choice. It's either go to the left home or the right home, but you can't go to both. In my stipulated example, there's a window of opportunity that closes after you go to one of them, and so you've got to pick which one. All right, now let me just add this little detail. Suppose that in this example, the house that's on the left holds 2 people, okay? The house that's on the right holds 10 people, okay? So before I say any more, if it was just pure utilitarian theory, which of these 2 homes should you provide assistance for or intervene in so that people can get out? There's 2 people inside the left house, 10 people on the right house. So, if you're just thinking about the basic concept of utilitarianism, they would advise that your obligation is to go to the one with 10. Yes, and why is that? Because there's more people, and since there's more people, there's more pain to prevent or future happiness to secure, because 10 is just a bigger number than 2 by a factor of 5. Okay, but now, Jerome, you're getting to the point, because this is the next layer of this hypothetical. I'm going to add a big plot twist. So suppose that, kind of similar to the trolley problem. Yes, you may have heard of the example of that. We can talk about that again later in the class. Now all of you are coming up with some interesting variations on the case. Like you're saying, oh, the 10 people are 100 years old, the 2 people in the other house are newborns. Yeah, it maybe makes a difference to the assessment, because how much total life is lying out ahead? How many years in total can the different people experience if they are saved? That's one consideration. I was going to take it in a slightly different direction, but it's on the same sort of page. Okay, so let me just add this detail. The people that are 2 people on the left in that home, they're dear loved ones of you. They're people that are so close to you that you have a long-standing, deep connection, loving relationship with. Who could those people be? I don't know. We're all different, but for you, it might be your parents or siblings, best friends, someone that matters a lot to you in life. So those are 2 people over there that if you're not going to help them, they're going to die right now. The other side, it's 10 people. Now, I'm not telling you they're bad people or they're just like something's wrong with them. They're normal people. They may have all kinds of loved ones and friends and family of their own, but they're total strangers to you. They're just random people that you don't know at all. So now still though, according to just pure utilitarianism, which home are you supposed to save? Still, it's the one that has more people because according to utilitarianism, it doesn't say do the action that creates the most overall happiness for you and your friends and family. It says take the action that will create the most total happiness for all affected. And therefore, it seems to impose on you an obligation that many of us would think is just inconsistent with our deeply held moral feelings. I'm sure most of you would say, but isn't there a virtue to loyalty or to the established bond that I have with these other people? And utilitarianism doesn't really say that. It kind of almost expects us to act in a way robotically and just always take care of the greatest overall happiness, regardless of whether that, overlaps with our own interests or the interests of people that we have fundamental, partiality towards. So it's like when Christmas comes, you could buy a nice PlayStation 5 for your child, or you could send that money to a children's hospital in the third world where it might actually save lives for the same exact dollar amount. Does this mean that we're never at liberty to, I guess, prioritize the greater happiness of ourselves and the close ones around us if that is outweighed by similar or different actions that could cause more total happiness for others? So it's just a problem that some people find with utilitarianism. Like, in a way, the demand to constantly maximize overall utility, to some people, if you really thought about the implications, it might strike you as counterintuitive because it imposes this demand that you, in some cases, ignore your deep personal feelings and bonds with others. Now, if you're a hardcore utilitarian, you probably wouldn't be moved by this example. You'd probably say, okay, well, all the example shows is that it's not always easy to do the right thing. Did you really think that doing the right thing was always going to just be fun and easy and support your happiness? Sometimes it'll be tough. And when it's human beings, yes, there's 10 as opposed to 2. So regardless if the 2, doesn't human life and the safety and security of a greater number of people matter more? But many of us, I think, viewing such cases would probably find them at least somewhat problematic for the theory. Now, looking into the chat, Mary Jane, you say it's difficult, but it makes sense to still save the 10 because more people would be negatively affected. And so good, you kind of anticipated my remarks just now, like the 10 people's family members who would have to grieve and such. Yes, exactly. So it's an objection maybe, but to other people, it's simply just a nuanced aspect of the theory that should be taken seriously. But there's one more powerful objection, which to my mind is probably the most heavy of all and the one that's the most difficult for utilitarians to overcome. So this is the last one I'll speak on right now. Objection to utilitarianism number 3. That is that no type of action is absolutely forbidden in principle. And that one is, to me, if I was going to pick one problem that utilitarian theory has, this is the one that sticks out to me the most, and I think to a lot of others that have talked and thought about it. So let's just try and get into the point. So based on what you currently understand about the utilitarian ethical theory, here's a question. According to the theory, is it always wrong to lie? Is it always wrong to lie or no? Someone maybe has the answer to that. If it's utilitarianism, okay, good, Marina, it's not always wrong to lie. Well, correct. So when would it be actually your moral obligation to lie? According to the theory anyway, you'd be obligated to lie if by lying you created more total pleasure or happiness than telling the truth. Okay, so some of you may hear that and you're like, yeah, but that's not actually too implausible because, after all, sometimes a little white lie, as we call them sometimes, can actually be not a bad thing. If it makes people happy and it doesn't cause any other really negative, harmful effects, then sure, why not? Let me give you an example. You're hanging out at like a potluck party where everyone's supposed to bring like a dish that they prepared, and one person at this event has made like something, right? Call it a dip or whatever. You tried this thing, but you're like, oh my God, that was disgusting. That was terrible. That was the worst meal I've had ever. It was gross. This person does not know how to cook. Yeah, yikes, that was just horrible. Okay, so now they're talking to you later on, and they say, hey, so how'd you like my dish? Now you're confronted with a choice. You can tell them the truth. The truth is like, you really want to know? I'm gonna have to tell you the truth, buddy. You need to work on your cooking game, like, because this is just some of the worst food I've ever had. On the other hand, you could lie. You could tell them, oh yeah, your meal, it was great. Yeah, I actually really liked it. That was, chef's kiss or whatever. But here's the thing. What's gonna make them happy is telling a lie. If you tell them the truth, this truth's going to hurt them a little bit and make them unhappy. So utilitarianism says, go ahead and lie, because we want to make as much happiness as possible, and whatever means to that end or needed, that's the right action. Now, you might look at that case and say, okay, fair enough, though. I don't really disagree with that. But the problem is, where does it end? Is it always then a good thing to lie if revealing the truth would cause less happiness than lying would? So should we just perpetuate lies when they make people happy? Say, for example, if someone was in a relationship and they were being cheated on, and the partner, could reveal that fact to their other partner and say, you know what, I'm telling you the truth, I've cheated on you. Or they could just lie, I've never cheated. Are you kidding? I would never do that. Now, if they tell the truth, the person's going to be hurt, and maybe it's going to hurt them deeply. But if they lie, then they're never going to feel any unhappiness because they don't even know about it. But does that mean that we should withhold on revealing facts that are painful to other people just because it makes them unhappy? I mean, some of you may think, sure, but it starts to erode the entire concept that there's a virtue in honesty and knowing the objective truth. Let's try another. In utilitarianism, is it always wrong to steal? What do you think about that point? Jerome, you put, what if telling the truth gets them to stop making it so the rest of the people at the event are happy because they don't have to eat it anymore? Yeah, I mean, we can vary the example in any number of ways. Potentially, you can revive, the everyday intuition that it would be better to tell the truth. And I don't want to stand in the way of that view, but I'm just trying to show you that it's at least to some people's mind, questionable whether that would be really, in fact, the good thing or not. But again, my question is the second point. What about stealing? Is it always wrong to steal by utilitarianism or no? What are you thinking? No, again, the answer is no. Again, the answer is it just depends. It depends on what, whether by stealing more happiness is created in total, or whether by declining to steal more happiness in total is created. So, like, I guess like in our Coke example, or stealing a loaf of bread to feed like a person that's otherwise going to starve, you might say, okay, sure, those are vindicated cases of stealing. But what if it's like stealing from the rich to give to the poor, like a Robin Hood type of character? I make a wealthy friend. I find that they have a room in their big mansion that's a trophy room. And there's this old, like solid gold trophy from the 1970s just collecting dust, like in a box. I take it, they'll never notice that it was taken. They're already super rich and fully satisfied, so their happiness isn't going to change at all. And then I sell this on the black market, get a bunch of money, and then let's say I give it all to charities that are going to help people in the world in real ways. Is this something that's morally acceptable or even obligatory? By utilitarianism, there's no real argument to give as to what's wrong with that, because it would seem that it could generate more happiness to redistribute this person's wealth in a way that perpetuates more total pleasure for people than what they would have had by maintaining their ownership of it. But here again, it starts to make you question the theory, like, okay, well then there's no like solid foundation for property rights. It's just like, let's distribute things in whatever way makes the most people happy. Obviously, sometimes inequalities in wealth and income exist, and they don't always tend towards the greatest total happiness, even if they make some people very happy. So, again, to the problem of utilitarianism, it doesn't place any guardrails around what type of actions are ever permitted or not. It just says, if it creates the most happiness, go ahead and do it, regardless of existing norms, standards, and even laws. And you give a question here, Jerome, what if the poor people get more happiness than the owners and sadness? And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point of the example. It would seem to indicate that the theft is actually the right action to do. But many people would look at that and say the theory starts to spill over into chaos because it doesn't establish that there's any fundamentally wrong types of action. Let me give you one last case. Would you say that according to utilitarianism, it's always wrong to kill an innocent person? That's one that you'd hope it would be always wrong, because people have every right to be alive. So you would think that there can never be moral acceptability towards killing an innocent person. But even this type of action cannot be absolutely ruled out by utilitarian theory as being permissible. You can certainly design or even imagine cases in which by killing one innocent person, there's more total happiness generated for others. So let me give you a random example. What do you mean innocent? I'm a person that's done nothing wrong, that's innocent of having done anything wrong whatsoever. So like, take my hypothetical. Suppose that this is called the transplant scenario. It's actually something that's related to the trolley problem. Another student had mentioned earlier. It's like a case that's raised in conjunction with the trolley problem case. But anyway, we don't have to speak about the actual trolley. Take this example called the transplant example. So let me clear the board a little bit so I can draw a little cartoon for you so you have a sense about it. The transplant scenario is just supposed to be a problem case for utilitarian moral intuitions, all right? So we imagine that there's these 5 people. I'm just drawing the stick figures of 5 people. Now the problem with these 5 people is that each one of them is suffering from a different type of vital organ that's failing. Okay, so what they all need is urgently to receive a transplant from some donor out in the world so that they can survive. If they don't receive the transplant, then they're going to die in a pretty short frame of time. Now, the thing about the example is that they all need different organs. They all need a vital organ, but each one needs a different one. So let's say this guy needs a heart transplant. This guy needs a new liver. This guy needs one of the kidneys. This one needs the other kidney. And maybe this guy needs a lung. Okay? So they have these needs. Now, one thing that's convenient about these 5 guys, or gals, whoever they are, is that they all have the same blood type. Let's just make up a blood type and say it's called XXX blood. So they all 5 have that same matching blood type. So what it means is that if you had even just one person with that matching blood type, and since they all need different organs, it would be possible to save all 5 of their lives if you had exactly how many donors? My question to you is, how many donors would be needed to save the 5, given that they all have the same blood type and they all need different organs? You could save all 5 of them if you just had what? You just had one donor. Okay, good. So let's suppose then that these 5 folks go into the doctor's office. Here's our doctor guy. And the doctor is going to try to find, a matching donor for the 5 people. So he's looking through the donor list. He's looking, scanning through the records, and he's just not finding anybody who has a match. Let's suppose it's a rare blood type. I'm sure some of you are like, but then how do all 5 of them have the same blood type if it's that rare? Don't worry about that. It's just a stipulation. It's just a hypothetical. So anyway, he's trying to find the person somewhere, but there's nobody. So now he's preparing himself to tell them sad news. Okay, guys, look, I tried. I went into the record. I was looking for anyone with that XXX match, but there's no available donors. So I'm sorry that I can't provide any assistance to you, and there's nothing I can do. But just as he's about to do that, in off the street comes this guy. And who is this? This is a young, healthy person like maybe you are, with no real medical problems at all. So the only real reason they're going to the doctor is for a basic checkup, to kind of do their due diligence. But it's not because they have any serious medical problems at all. So while they come in, he has a free moment before he goes and speaks to these 5. And he just quickly, the doctor looks at this new patient's medical chart and info. And he notices a very important and interesting fact about them, which is that what? You could probably guess. The new person off the street, the young, healthy patient, actually has what? The same XXX blood. Okay, good. So now the doctor's thinking, all right, well, we have actually a match now, this guy that walked in. And if I was able to utilize his organs, then that full set of organs could be distributed to these 5 people, and then 5 would live at his expense. Okay, so let's suppose the doctor has a moment with this person, and he says, "Excuse me, this is a random way to put things, and it's going to come out as a shocking question, I guess. But let me just put it out there and be blunt and straightforward. In the next ward, we have 5 people that have come to see me, and they all need different organs for transplant because they're going to die basically if they don't receive those transplants. The thing is, they all have the same blood type. It's very rare, though. If I had even one donor with the matching blood type, then that person could save all 5 of them. Now, you came into my office randomly, and it's just a stroke of sheer coincidence, but I'm seeing that you actually have that type of blood. So let me just throw it out there. Tell me what you think. Would it be okay with you if I was, say, to take all of the organs out of you, divide them among these 5 people, and then they're all going to live? Now, of course, as you know, that you would never survive that procedure. You could be totally disemboweled and everything, but 5 will live if this happens. And isn't it important for us to make as many people survive as possible? I mean, if you decline to provide your organs, then surely you will live, but 5 will die. And then we will have a net negative of 4, as opposed to the alternative where 5 live and 1 die. So what do you say? Now, if this person's anything like me or you, I'm sure we already know what his answer is going to be. Like, excuse me, what? Did I hear you correctly? Are you even a doctor? Like, absolutely not. No way. No, hell no. You know, I have no problem with those people. I feel very sorry for them and their families, but, you know, I'm a human being. I have every right to be alive. My organs, I can't just be used as a car in a junkyard that you're taking spare parts from to service other vehicles. So no. Now, if this guy was like a hardcore utilitarian, what should he do? I mean, it's disturbing to consider, but I guess according to at least the theory, unless it's changed or modified in some way, it would see that, well, you say the utilitarian would say yes, but if he says no, the doctor, according to one way of looking at it, according to the theory, ought to just kill this person. It doesn't matter that he said no. Let's take his life, take the organs, give them to the 5, and now we're going to have more people surviving than if we hadn't done that. But now, the question for you is, would you say that seems to you just common sense to be wrong or not wrong? I mean, I think here at least, even if you're favorable to utilitarianism in general, many people are going to push back and be like, that's wrong though, that's totally wrong. But notice that it's hard for the utilitarian to state any clear reason based on their theory as to why it is wrong. It seems wrong intuitively, but the theory only says do whatever creates the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So like, I mean, I don't know, what if there was like a homeless person living out on Skid Row that has no contribution to society, maybe even like a criminal record of petty crime, and they have healthy organs that could be given to people that are a greater number or maybe more productive and more connected to others socially. Don't you think it would be wrong and monstrous, the idea that, well, we should just involuntarily seize the organs from such people so that we can maintain more total happiness for more people? Now, that's wrong. And so the theory of utilitarianism faces these problems and difficulties, that it doesn't really allow us to ever say that something is categorically ruled out. It's like every wrong action that we typically think is wrong, they would say it depends. It depends on the scenario and whether by doing it, it would lead to more total happiness than not doing it. So theft, lying, cheating, stealing, killing, it's all on the table in utilitarian ethics because any means are acceptable to the overall end of maximizing as much happiness as possible. Now, let's be fair though. Utilitarians, when they're faced with these kind of examples, they often will come up with an inventive modification to the theory to try and avoid the problem. Like some utilitarians would say, well, okay, first of all, this situation is not a real situation. There's no such thing that's really going to happen. So it's a purely fanciful, extravagant example, disconnected from the real scenarios in which we do apply the theory. Others would also maybe bite the bullet and they would say, like, look, killing one innocent person to save a greater number, it depends on the way you construct the scenario. Suppose there was a hostage situation and the hostage taker has a big bomb that's going to blow up like 100 people in a building, and there's a timer on it, and he has demands that no one can meet. So we're running short on time. Suppose that he has one human shield that he's like using to provide a barrier from like incoming gunfire from sniper teams and law enforcement. Now, suppose that one sniper has a clear shot at the terrorist, but the only way that they can hit them is by firing the fatal shot through the human shield. Now, you might argue that in this case, it's not necessarily wrong, or at least in some people's view, it wouldn't be wrong for that sniper to take the shot, because even though it's killing one innocent person, what's the alternative? If he doesn't do anything, the bomb's going to go off. Suppose that we need to kill the hostage taker guy because he holds the detonator. And so in that case, you might say, well, how is it structurally dissimilar to this one? We're killing one innocent person because if we don't, an even greater number are going to die. So depending on the way you finesse or explain the scenarios, some of these intuitions can be kind of reestablished. But I just pointed out to you as a problem case for many utilitarian theorists. And that's one of the ones that I find the most difficult. So if you believe in anything like absolute rights that should never be violated under any conditions, then you've got to kind of search elsewhere for a moral theory, because utilitarianism says any actions can be deemed morally acceptable or even obligated if they maximize as much happiness as possible. So now I've told you all about utilitarianism. It took a little longer to get through it, but that's great. So next piece that we're going to start learning about is the major theoretical rival to the utilitarian system of ethics. So it's not like utilitarianism is the only ethical theory. There's another one that has a lot of influence, and it's very different from utilitarianism, and it will give us completely different answers to these kind of cases that were problematic for the utilitarian. So we'll get to as much of it as we can with like the last 10 minutes of class, and then we'll continue on this, like in the next episode on Thursday. But okay, so another important moral theorist that's going to be talked about now is this man, Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, that's his name, and he's a German philosopher who lived from 1724 until 1804. So lived for 80 years. He's considered probably one of the most important philosophers in the history of the West. He wrote on almost every conceivable topic in philosophy, metaphysics, philosophy of mind, and of course ethics. But he's probably most well known for his writings in ethics. He wrote an important book in 1785, which is called Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. I'll type that in this chat here. So anyway, that's just the title of his important book. We have a section of it printed in our textbook. This book by Kant from 1785 was his attempt to express the fundamental concept of ethics and what it basically depends on. Grounding for the metaphysics of morals. In German, it's the word grounding is Grundgesetze. In some translations, it's written as foundations for the metaphysics of morals or groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. I'm just going with the synonymous term grounding. So Kant's ethical theory is a much different system from the one designed by Mill. The first thing I want to tell you about Kant's ethical system is that it has nothing to do with the consequences of actions. It doesn't say the consequences matter at all. Instead, what matters in Kantian ethics is the intention that somebody has when they perform an action. And by the way, we can just call Kant's ethical system Kantianism, which is what most academics refer to it by. Kantianism, named after him, of course. So that's just the full term. So it says that what's important in ethics are the intentions of the person performing the act, not the consequences that result from the act. So let me put that here. Okay, so it says there, what matters morally? Are you needing to remember the philosopher's time periods? Good question, Julian. Not really. It's more important to just understand the concepts and substance of their ideas. It's a nice sort of footnote to that to understand when they lived. Like Mill was from the 1800s, Kant was from the 1700s. But no, that's not really important. It's the philosophy concepts themselves rather than just random dates that are needed. So not to worry. But anyway, yeah, so in Kant's ethical framework, we should not focus on what the results are that come out of the actions, but instead the will, the intention that the person brings to the action when they perform it. So I think last time I drew a little diagram to express what consequentialist ethics means, which utilitarianism is one brand of consequentialism. And I drew this little kind of stick figure diagram. Suppose they perform action and this arrow stands for time. At the tail of the arrow, I drew the letter C to refer to the consequences that come from the action. And in utilitarian thought, this was the important factor, those results. You got to act in whatever way is going to lead to the most favorable results in terms of overall happiness / pleasure. But now we're looking at Kant, and he says, no, this is not the right picture. To Kant, it is, again, the intention that the person has when they perform the action that matters. So instead of drawing like a forward-pointing arrow toward the consequences, in Kant's mind, or at least according to his theory, the right point to consider is rather the intention that exists in the mind of the person when they do the action. So I try to draw a little letter I inside of the head of the person because this is where intentions are first formed in your mind prior to the commission of the act. So to Kant, that's what we should be prioritizing and thinking about ethically. whether the person who did the act acted with a good intention. So the principle, yes, is more important to Kant, according to his view, right, Mary Jane? Rather than the results, it's not results-oriented, it is not consequence-based, it's based instead on the intention and will of the person that performs the act. Let me give you just a random example, and we'll kind of close with this, and then we'll pick up with more Kant on Thursday. And if there's ever a need to like delete like an article, let's say, from our syllabus, then we'll make those decisions as we go forward. It's possible that we will spend some additional time on ethical theory to make sure we have a solid base. In that case, it's possible we may eliminate maybe one of the later articles in the course, like on genetic engineering and human cloning. But anyway, okay, so here's an example to think about the difference between utilitarian ethics and Kantian ethics. And we'll establish more detail on Kant on Thursday. But all right, take this case. Suppose that you're just driving. You're driving down the road, you got a car, okay? And when you look over to the shoulder of the, let's say, roadway that you're on, you notice that there's another driver who's got their car off to the side of the road, and it looks like they're maybe stranded, maybe they've had a mechanical malfunction, maybe they need a jumper cable or whatever, or someone to make a phone call for them at least. So suppose on this given day, you're such a nice person that you take the decision to pull aside and just walk up and see if there's anything that they need from you. So you do that. You pull over, you see their car, you're walking up. Now let's suppose that when you approach the car, you notice some kind of disturbing things. Basically, it's this. This person that's in their car, they're unconscious. They're sitting in their driver's seat. They're not dead. You can see they're breathing and everything, but they're not responding to you because you're like, excuse me, hey, how's it going? Are you all right? You need anything? And they're just passed out, unconscious. And you try your best to rouse their awareness, but they're not responding. So that kind of concerns you a little bit. Now, let's suppose that as you expect the scene a little further, you look at the front of the car and you see there's actually a little bit of minor damage. You didn't notice it before, but there's some damage there, and there's even a couple of little vespers of smoke that are like emanating from under the hood of this car. So at that point in time, you're a little bit worried about the person in the vehicle. So I'm just going to put it out there. What is an action that the person who's approaching the car might take in this situation out of concern for the other individual? Not to worry, Jasmine, thank you. You can always watch the last few minutes on the replay when you get to the video later. So thanks for your attendance. But to others, question, in our example, you saw the car, you saw the person's unconscious, you saw that there's some damage to the front and maybe some smoke coming out of the engine area. So you're thinking call for help, Mary Jane? Surely you would do that. But, time is of the essence. You might be worried that there's not enough time for something urgent to happen in case the emergency medical technicians and first responders take too long. So, it's a little bit of an intervention into the scene, but I'm fishing around for one more perhaps possible action. I'm not saying everyone would take it, but at least some people might be such a good Samaritan that they think it would be wise to do what for the individual who's still in the car. Attempt to take them out of the car. That was kind of what I was trying to, establish. Correct, Amanda. Yeah, so let's say that you are worried about the car catching fire, getting consumed by smoke, blowing up, because you see that the engine block is hot and that it's been damaged and smoke's coming out. So let's suppose you do that out of an abundance of caution and concern for the well-being of the person that's the driver. Now moments pass and first responders are arriving to the scene. They weren't there before, but now they're arriving. They see you, they see the car, they see the person laid out gently on the side of the road. And let's suppose this is the interaction you have. You're like, okay, guys, I'm glad you're here. You can take over. Professionals are here, and I'm going to head out. But then they're like, okay, that sounds great, but we just have a few questions for you before you go. First off, like, what's your relation to this person? Do you know them? Like, how are you guys connected, if at all? And then you're like, well, actually, so about that, I don't know him at all. I'm a total stranger. I'm a good Samaritan, though, and I thought I would help him when I pulled over, and this is what I saw, so now you guys can take over. And they say, okay, but one more thing, though. They're laid out on the ground over here. How did that happen? Were they already like that when you arrived? Or did you take them out of the car? How did they get outside the car? And so you're like, okay, all right, yeah, about that. I did remove them from the car, but I did it because I was worried. You can see the damage over the front, and I thought, who knows, this car could catch fire, blow up, something. I don't want them to be inside the vehicle or the cabin when it happens, so that's why I thought it'd be best to remove them out of concern for their safety. Now suppose the first responder guy's like, okay, I appreciate that you did that, I understand why, but the thing is, you probably should just wait until the professionals like us arrive, because you don't necessarily know what you're doing. You don't know the extent of their injuries. Are you aware that if they have, like, say, a spinal column injury and you don't have the proper tools like a neck brace and a backboard, that by moving them in the way that you did, even if you did it carefully, you could induce a further severing of the spinal column and actually cause paralysis from the neck down, so they won't have motor control for the rest of their life. And by the way, you're watching too many movies. This car's not going to blow up. That's light damage, if anything. Now you're feeling bad, but you're like, actually, I didn't know that. So thanks for letting me know. I'm sorry. And they're like, okay, anyway, you can go. So you leave. Let's follow this hypothetical to its conclusion. Suppose that when they get the guy back to the hospital, they run tests and it's like, actually, oops, because you moved them, you made them way worse off because now they are paralyzed from the neck down. And if you had never been there and if you had never intervened, they would have had full motor control for the rest of their life, making them so much happier than they would be, than they are in the circumstances that we find them in since you moved them. Now, last word. In utilitarianism, the only thing that matters is the consequences, the results, whether intended or not. So in utilitarian theory, they would have to say this was bad, this was wrong, you did the wrong thing because what you did not create the most overall happiness, and it subtracted a lot of happiness from the person's remaining life. But on the Kantian viewpoint, do you say that this was wrong? They wouldn't, because why not? Well, even if it led to a bad result, the action was committed with the best of intentions. There was no ill will, malice, or anything else that led you to do the act. To the contrary, you did it out of concern for the person's well-being and safety. So did it work out as you might have hoped? No, certainly not. But in Kant's ethical system, the results are not relevant. The only thing that we can morally judge you on is the intention that you bring to the action. So if the intention is good and the consequences don't play out well, it's really not relevant. This is a complete flipping of the coin from the utilitarians who say intentions are not relevant, only consequences in terms of total happiness. So intentions-based versus consequence-based. You're seeing now just a structural difference between the two. There's a lot more to say, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. So I don't want to keep you guys late. Anybody that's watching right now, please feel free to just sign off and say goodbye. I'll close the chat. To those watching later, you got to be at the lectures. You know, I thought today I saw numbers like 27, but I know there's a lot more people in the class than that. So definitely be coming to class. But as you're hearing me right now, feel free to just type out your goodbyes or whatever else, and then I'm going to close this stream, and then we'll see you guys on Thursday. Okay, everybody, everything's good. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you guys for being here. Will we study Nietzsche or Hegel this semester? No, we won't. I mean, those are very interesting authors, but this is more of a moral issues class. So once we get a fundamental basis in moral theory, we're going to move on quickly to like topics like abortion, drug use, animals, and all the rest. So the issues is like part of the course. All right, thanks everybody. I'm again happy to see you again, and we'll be back on Thursday. If you need anything in the meantime, you can always email me. For now, though, I'm closing this one. Take it easy, and until next time, be safe, and I'll see you guys soon.